What should have been an ordinary promotional appearance by one of Hollywood's most recognizable actors quickly transformed into a heated television exchange that left audiences stunned. The interview, expected to focus on an upcoming movie release, instead became a tense confrontation marked by difficult questions, visible frustration, and growing discomfort among everyone on set. As emotions escalated, viewers found themselves divided over who was in the right and who had crossed the line. Johnny Depp entered the studio anticipating a familiar format. Like many celebrities promoting new projects, he expected to discuss his latest film, share stories from production, and engage in lighthearted conversation with the hosts. The audience welcomed him enthusiastically, applauding as he took his seat and greeted the panel with a calm smile. The conversation began on a positive note. A warm introduction acknowledged his return to the program, and Depp responded politely, thanking the hosts for inviting him back. At first glance, everything seemed routine. But the atmosphere shifted almost immediately when one of the panelists steered the discussion toward controversies surrounding his personal life rather than his current work. Instead of easing into the interview with questions about filmmaking or acting, the host challenged him about legal disputes and public scrutiny, asking how those events had influenced his professional opportunities. The unexpected direction appeared to surprise both Depp and several members of the panel, creating a noticeable pause before he carefully redirected attention toward the film he had come to promote. He explained that he hoped to focus on the project and the creative effort behind it, emphasizing that audiences might enjoy the work itself. However, the host continued pressing the issue, suggesting that many people still wanted answers about past events and questioning whether the public deserved a direct explanation before supporting his future endeavors. As the questioning intensified, the other co-host seemed increasingly uneasy. Attempts to transition toward lighter subjects or discuss the movie were interrupted, keeping the spotlight fixed on Depp's personal controversies. One host appeared ready to move the conversation elsewhere, but the determined interviewer insisted that difficult issues should remain the primary topic. The questions became sharper, suggesting that fans, particularly longtime supporters, might feel disappointed or misled by recent headlines. Depp maintained a measured tone, arguing that audiences should judge artistic work independently from an individual's private affairs. He stated that his purpose as an actor had always been to create memorable characters and entertain viewers, rather than invite scrutiny into every aspect of his personal history. The interviewer challenged that distinction, arguing that audiences invest not only money but also trust and emotional support when they choose to follow a performer's career. According to this perspective, separating the individual from the work was unrealistic, especially when public controversies dominated headlines. Murmurs spread through the audience as the exchange grew more confrontational. The atmosphere no longer resembled a standard daytime interview but instead felt increasingly like a debate. Depp's replies remained controlled, though signs of irritation became visible, as he repeated that he had come to discuss professional achievements, rather than defend himself against accusations unrelated to the film. The host countered by implying that accountability could not simply be avoided through charisma or popularity. Another member of the panel attempted to redirect attention by asking about Depp's experiences working with fellow cast members and collaborators on the new production. Yet before the discussion could shift, the interviewer steered it back toward the earlier subject, insisting viewers wanted reassurance about his credibility. Depp responded that he was an actor whose job was to make movies and that audiences retained the freedom to decide whether or not to watch them. The host rejected that reasoning, arguing that public figures seeking support from consumers inevitably invite judgment of both their professional output and their conduct beyond the screen. By this stage, the tension in the studio was unmistakable. Production staff reportedly sensed that the interview had become unusually dramatic, while the remaining hosts appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The determined questioning continued without easing, creating a stark contrast to the relaxed promotional appearances celebrities typically expect. Eventually, Depp voiced his belief that the interviewer had formed conclusions before the conversation even began. He described the experience as feeling less like an interview and more like an orchestrated attempt to corner him. The response prompted an immediate rebuttal, with the host insisting that rigorous questioning represented accountability rather than unfair treatment. The disagreement marked a turning point in the exchange. Depp's previously calm demeanor gave way to a firmer and more pointed tone as he criticized what he viewed as a media culture built around harsh public judgment. In return, the interviewer accused him of shifting the focus toward personal attacks instead of addressing the concerns that had been raised. The audience reacted audibly as the conversation grew increasingly intense. Many were accustomed to seeing Depp in relaxed interviews where humor and storytelling dominated, making the sharper exchanges particularly striking. The host, meanwhile, appeared unfazed by the escalating conflict and continued responding with confidence, interpreting his reaction as confirmation of the issues she had been highlighting. By then, the interview had evolved far beyond its original purpose. What began as an opportunity to promote a film had become a highly charged discussion about reputation, public perception, celebrity responsibility, and the limits of confrontational journalism. Viewers watching the exchange were left to decide for themselves whether the persistent questioning represented necessary scrutiny or whether it overshadowed the intended focus on artistic work and professional accomplishments. As the exchange became more intense, accusations began flying from both sides. The suggestion that Johnny Depp could not tolerate difficult questions drew an immediate response. He insisted that he was not attacking anyone, but merely pointing out what he viewed as double standards, arguing that criticizing him while benefiting from public controversy seemed contradictory. His grip tightened on the chair as he tried to make his point, his frustration becoming increasingly visible. Attempts by another host to calm the discussion made little difference. Before the conversation could be redirected, the questioning resumed with renewed intensity. Depp was invited to express his true feelings about those who criticized him, prompting him to lean forward and admit that the interview no longer felt like a friendly television appearance. Instead, he compared the experience to being placed on trial, claiming he believed judgments had already been made before he had spoken more than a few words. The response he received only heightened the conflict. A dismissive remark suggested that perhaps audiences no longer cared about his perspective and had grown tired of hearing explanations that portrayed him as misunderstood. The statement visibly upset him, while the remaining panelists appeared deeply uncomfortable. One host focused intently on her notes while another repeatedly glanced toward staff members behind the cameras, seemingly hoping someone would intervene before matters escalated further. Depp rejected the implication that he viewed himself as a victim. Raising his voice, he criticized what he saw as constant public judgment from commentators who relied on headlines rather than first-hand knowledge. In reply, the interviewer defended her position by referring to public reports, legal proceedings, and testimony that had entered the public record, maintaining that her questions were based on available information rather than speculation. The disagreement intensified when Depp abruptly rose from his chair, causing it to slide backward across the floor. The unexpected movement stunned the studio, leaving only the sound of production equipment in the background. He accused the program of prioritizing sensationalism over fairness and suggested that attracting attention mattered more than understanding complicated circumstances. Although the interviewer remained seated initially, her confidence appeared to waver for a brief moment before she urged him to sit back down and accused him of overreacting. Depp answered with visible disbelief, explaining that he had arrived intending to promote a movie involving the work of hundreds of cast and crew members, but had instead spent the segment defending his personal history before a national audience. The host argued that public figures inevitably invite examination beyond their professional achievements, insisting that celebrity status carries accountability. Depp interrupted, challenging the idea that the discussion served any noble purpose. He questioned whether the real motivation was moral responsibility or simply the pursuit of ratings and dramatic television. Those comments prompted an indignant reply, with the interviewer insisting that she was merely presenting viewers with an honest assessment of the situation. Depp countered by accusing her of confusing rumor with fact and entertainment with journalism. She rejected that criticism immediately, claiming that factual reporting guided her perspective and suggesting he was unwilling to confront uncomfortable realities. Growing more animated, Depp stepped closer to the panel and declared that the interview had become an attempt to publicly damage his reputation, rather than hold a balanced conversation. He argued that the questioning reflected enjoyment in tearing down prominent individuals rather than seeking truth. Around the studio, tension became increasingly obvious as production staff exchanged concerned looks while the remaining hosts stayed largely silent. The interviewer denied taking pleasure in conflict, and instead described her role as demanding accountability from influential people. Depp answered that what disturbed him most was the use of a major platform to humiliate guests for entertainment value. He sharply criticized her style, portraying it as deliberate provocation rather than objective reporting. The exchange quickly became personal. In response, the interviewer dismissed him as an aging performer unable to accept criticism. The remark immediately shifted the atmosphere. Observers watched as Depp's posture stiffened and his hands clenched, prompting concern that emotions might boil over into something more serious. After a brief pause, he answered in a quieter but more controlled voice, acknowledging that enduring relentless public scrutiny was extraordinarily difficult. He remarked that few people would willingly face the same level of examination they expected others to tolerate. The interviewer coolly suggested that if such pressure was unbearable, perhaps public life was no longer the right place for him. Without hesitation, Depp returned the criticism, remarking that television might likewise not suit someone who approached discussions in such a confrontational manner. Another host attempted once again to interrupt and restore order, but the effort was unsuccessful as the debate continued uninterrupted. The interviewer then questioned what entitled him to criticize both the program and its viewers while appearing as a guest. Depp looked around the studio audience before replying that they deserved genuine dialogue, instead of watching personalities attack one another for dramatic effect. He argued that meaningful conversation had been replaced by spectacle. At that point the interviewer stood as well, facing him across the table. She defended her questioning as an example of asking difficult but necessary questions rather than offering celebrities comfortable publicity opportunities. Depp strongly disagreed, insisting that none of the inquiries had seriously addressed the creative project he had been invited to discuss and had instead focused almost entirely on personal attacks disguised as journalism. With both individuals now standing, the atmosphere reached its highest level of intensity. The other panelists remained frozen, uncertain whether intervening would improve or worsen the situation. Audience members watched in silence as the confrontation unfolded with remarkable hostility. The most striking moment arrived when the interviewer declared that his career had effectively ended, asserting that few people wanted to collaborate with him or support his future work. The blunt assessment appeared to shock not only the audience but also some on stage, creating a prolonged silence after the words were spoken. Depp paused before responding with measured calm. He acknowledged the possibility that professional opportunities could disappear but argued that he had at least devoted years to creating films and artistic projects. Turning the criticism back on his opponent, he claimed that her career centered on criticizing the accomplishments of others rather than producing creative work herself. She immediately defended her own legacy, stating that she had earned recognition by speaking candidly and building a successful television career. Depp dismissed that characterization, insisting that bluntness and cruelty were not the same thing and suggesting that relentless criticism should not be mistaken for honesty. Depp answered without hesitation, arguing that criticizing people from behind a television desk, while they had limited opportunity to defend themselves, was not an act of honesty but one of convenience. In his view, there was a significant distinction between sincere truth, telling and targeting individuals in a way that left them at a disadvantage. He bluntly described that approach as an act of cowardice rather than courage. The accusation visibly rattled Joy, who appeared stunned before responding with outrage. She insisted that she was simply asking the difficult questions that others might avoid and demanded to know how anyone could label her a coward for doing her job. Depp remained firm, taking another step toward the panel while explaining that he believed her questions were designed less to uncover facts and more to embarrass guests in front of a national audience. He argued that genuine accountability should involve fairness and balance instead of public humiliation. Joy quickly countered that if he felt damaged by the discussion, perhaps that reflected unresolved issues on his own conscience. Her reply, however, carried less certainty than earlier remarks, and the confidence she had projected throughout much of the confrontation seemed to weaken. Speaking in a calmer tone, Depp rejected the suggestion that guilt motivated his reaction. Instead, he claimed that the behavior unfolding before everyone in the studio revealed more about the interviewer's character than his own. Around them, the remaining hosts had abandoned attempts to redirect the conversation. They watched silently as both participants stood locked in a verbal battle that neither seemed willing to end. Joy challenged his criticism by declaring that she viewed herself as someone unafraid to confront influential figures with uncomfortable subjects. She portrayed her role as holding public personalities responsible for their actions rather than avoiding controversy. Depp immediately disputed that characterization, asserting that there was a difference between demanding accountability and engaging in bullying under the guise of journalism. According to him, profiting from conflict while presenting it as bravery distorted the purpose of public discussion. He added that the most unfortunate aspect was his belief that she no longer recognized how harsh her approach had become. For a brief instant, his words appeared to affect her expression, as uncertainty flashed across her face before determination returned. Frustrated, Joy ordered him to leave the stage. Depp answered that he was perfectly willing to do so and turned toward the exit. Before he could walk away, however, she called after him with another sharp remark, declaring that there was no place for unsuccessful actors attempting to lecture others about ethics or integrity. The comment stopped him in his tracks. He slowly faced the panel again, his expression causing audible reactions from some members of the audience. Speaking softly but with unmistakable intensity, he questioned her use of the phrase and argued that real decline came not from setbacks in a career, but from spending years attacking others instead of contributing meaningful work. He suggested that bitterness and resentment had replaced creativity, accusing her of devoting her platform to criticism, because creating something lasting had become secondary to provoking conflict. As emotions continued rising, Joy's composure finally gave way, and she called for security to escort him away from the set. Two security personnel approached from offstage, but Depp raised a hand to indicate that force would not be necessary. He calmly assured everyone that he intended to leave voluntarily. Before exiting, he paused and addressed those watching in the studio, saying he hoped they would remember what they had witnessed whenever individuals gained influence, by encouraging hostility and rewarding confrontational behavior with applause or attention. Turning briefly toward the primary camera, he remarked that challenging such conduct was sometimes necessary, even when doing so invited criticism. Joy, visibly furious, fired back with another insult, portraying him as someone unable to accept scrutiny and describing him in deeply unflattering terms. In response, Depp smiled faintly, though there was little warmth in the gesture. He replied that genuine disappointment came from dedicating one's career to diminishing the accomplishments of others instead of helping create something positive. In his opinion, investing energy in destruction rather than imagination reflected a far sadder legacy than facing setbacks within the entertainment industry. By then the security staff had positioned themselves nearby, but Depp offered no resistance and continued walking toward the exit under his own power. Moments before disappearing from the stage, he glanced back over his shoulder and casually mentioned that his latest film would soon be released, encouraging anyone interested in supporting creative work to judge it on its own merits. After delivering those remarks, he exited the studio, leaving behind an audience that appeared stunned by the confrontation. The remaining hosts stayed seated in silence while Joy remained standing, visibly emotional and struggling to regain composure after the extraordinary exchange. Cameras continued recording the aftermath, capturing several seconds during which almost no one spoke and the atmosphere remained heavy with tension. Eventually, the program shifted away from the confrontation as production moved toward a scheduled interruption. The incident itself had lasted only a short period, yet its intensity created the impression of a much longer conflict. Viewers had witnessed a side of Depp that contrasted sharply with his familiar public image, as he abandoned his usual relaxed demeanor to push back forcefully against accusations he believed were unfair. At the same time, the interviewer's persistent style became the center of attention, with critics and supporters likely to interpret her conduct in dramatically different ways. Some could view her persistence as an example of rigorous questioning intended to hold celebrities responsible for their actions, while others might interpret it as an unnecessarily aggressive performance that prioritized confrontation over understanding. Throughout the encounter, the line between accountability and hostility seemed increasingly blurred. What began as an interview about professional work transformed into a personal clash over reputation, ethics, media responsibility, and public perception. Every exchange intensified the disagreement, with each participant accusing the other of misusing influence and abandoning fairness in favor of spectacle. The silence from the rest of the panel and the visible discomfort among those present underscored just how extraordinary and emotionally charged the confrontation had become as events unfolded in front of the cameras.